Thank you, Amanda, for the beautiful. Welcome to Fairfield Friends Meeting. We're glad you are here, and those on Zoom also. As usual, we request that you turn off your phones or put them on airplane mode. I'm Rex Jones. Almost forgot to say it right here. So, our opening hymn is number 287 in the Worship and Song Hymnal, God Who is Father, Mother. Well, I'm supposed to have a centering thought that's supposed to last only a minute or two. That's hard for me because I'm a former preacher. But anyway, some say we live in a soundbite society where simple slogans can take the place of deep and nuanced conversations. And religious people can be particularly prone to it. I call it bumper sticker religion. Now, I love bumper stickers, especially when I'm in traffic. But I remember seeing one sticker that said, "In case of rapture, this car will be unmanned." And then a few days later, I saw another one that said, In case of rapture, can I have your car? Yeah. No, that wasn't Stuart's car. The ultimate one was one that said, I hate bumper stickers. Yeah. Well, sound bites and bumper stickers can be entertaining, but also limiting. They can have a I gotcha quality to them, shutting down conversations rather than beginning them. For certain Christians, slogans and sayings can be their stock and trade. Examples: love the sinner, hate the sin. That is very difficult for sometimes to separate those two. Another one says, the Bible clearly says. And here's the ultimate conversation stopper. The Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it. These are sayings of people that are unable or unwilling to wrestle with the deep issues of faith. Truth is captured, reduced, packaged, and pronounced. Exclusive, proud, and final. Here's a Bible verse. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Now, these words come from the discussion between a lawyer and Jesus and ended up with the Good Samaritan story. It's a back and forth conversation with soul-searching questions that lead to profound answers. How do we relate to God? What is important in life? Who is my neighbor? These questions are conversation starters that cause us to reflect on life. Now is the time for community sharing. We'll start with announcements with people on Zoom. Anybody having any announcements? How about in the meeting house?
Me first. As usual. San Tarvin. This time it's for our chat room, not for ministering council. Next week we'll be having a special guest. Some of you already know her, Najia Sherzad Hashmand from Afghanistan originally, although she's been a lot of places. And she is now working with, I forget what they're called. I can't remember the name of Patchwork Indy. There we go, Patchwork Indy, which is a refugee resettlement group, and she's going to talk about her work. And we have Libby Whipple to thank for finding her. She went to some event at the Islamic Center and met her, and they got to talking and hit it off, and here we are. So she will be at chat room next week. 9:30, the regular time, not 9:30, not the special Quaker session time. Yes, 9:30, and we will have the usual coffee and goodies. So that's all I have for once.
Okay.
Okay, this is Joanne Gulley, and I'm here on behalf of the Women's Reading Group. We are starting again February the 2nd, that first Sunday in February. And this is a different kind of meeting on that day. We're not discussing a book that day. We're having a pitch-in lunch. Yes. We're going to get caught up with each other, which is going to be fun, and we're going to decide how to move forward, what we want to read next, and things like that. We're also going to do a little show and tell, because Laura Gabbard has been doing something really cool with her reading journal, so I've asked her to talk about that. I'm hoping that Linda and Sydney can talk a little bit about their trip to Antarctica, and so it's just going to be a time of catching up and, as I like to say with my friends, coffee, carbs, and conversation. So that's February 2nd, right at the rise of worship.
I guess this is the announcement section. I'm Randy Horton. I'm your clerk, so I guess I'm here on behalf of leadership. At any rate, Anita's not in here, is she? Okay. I'm just inviting you to join us next Sunday for our monthly meeting for business. We'll start around noon, so you'll have a chance to get a bite to eat if you care to in the dining room before we start. That's all. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Laura Day, and I'm happy to announce we have 14 definite people going on our civil rights pilgrimage to Alabama. It is coming up in 8 short weeks. So the people who have definitely said they're going to go, you've got 2 weeks to make your reservations at the motels. All the information about that is in the December newsletter, which is archived, or you can see me. The people that are still, there's 3 or 4 people that are sort of not quite sure yet. If you could let me know in the next week, I would really appreciate it, because we need to start working on rides for people. Thank you.
I'm Josiah Hostetler, and on behalf of Peace and Social Justice Committee, I have a few announcements. First, there was an LGBTQ panel that was supposed to be held this coming Wednesday. That has been canceled due to lack of registration. But if you're searching for resources for LGBTQIA plus individuals, please email me. I have some connections that I can help make with those. Second is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday celebration service is coming up on Monday, January 20th at St. John's Missionary Baptist Church. If you've never been to that event, please come. I'll put the flyer out in the hallway. It's a chance to interact with people who met Dr. Martin Luther King in person and share some of their stories. And then third, as a bookend to the Civil Rights Tour on April 2nd at 7 at Butler University, the CIC and the Butler Cultural Compass Center will be screening Brother Outsider, which chronicles the life and work of Bayard Rustin, a Quaker hero of many of us. And his partner will be there to talk about that film afterwards. So it will be quite an experience. So I'll continue to mention the film on and off.
Lord, it's wonderful to be a part of a community that can share so much of the joys and the sorrows, and sometimes they're mixed. We thank you for the gift of community. Your word of light and hope floods into our lives. We sometimes live in darkness and despair and fear and doubt and strife. But on this day, you remind us that we are marked by you to be witnesses to the light of new hope. We have brought before you names and situations that concern us, people who face illness and grief. We are also aware of lives who have been torn apart by poverty and war and alienation and addiction and hopelessness. We especially pray for the safety of those who have experienced the brunt of the fires in California, and we pray for those who have lost loved ones in this tragedy. Help us to learn that we cannot ignore what the earth is saying to us in regards to complicity in global warming. We hold before you the victims of war and violence throughout the world. We ask for your loving mercy upon them, O Lord. Heal them and bind up their wounds. Help us to be a people who are ready to be involved in ministries of peace and justice, bringing the light of hope to all. We ask this in your gracious name. Amen.
Well, good morning, friends. I was meeting a friend for lunch a couple weeks ago and arrived early, and there was an antique store next to the restaurant, and so I thought, well, I'll just go in that antique store and poke around and see what they have. And I saw in there, hanging on a coat rack, a mink stole. And it reminded me of my grandmother, Gulley. I would go to hug her, and there would be that little mink face staring me right in the eyeball. And my grandmother Gulley, a very refined woman who took it upon herself to make us fit for civilization. Fortunately, I didn't see her often. When my mom and dad were first married, they moved 120 miles away from her to give themselves a little breathing room, but she was a determined woman, so would drive to our house every couple of months and stay for a long weekend. I say long weekend, though it was only 2 days. Like every other weekend, it just felt longer. But on the weekend she would visit, my mom and dad would warn us to be on our best behavior. The difficulty was in knowing what constituted best behavior, since we never knew in advance the theme of her visit, whether she might teach us the proper way to greet dignitaries in case the Queen of England ever visited Danville, or the appropriate attire for public events, or grammar. That was a big one for my grandmother, grammar. There were right words and wrong words, bad words and good words, innocent words and dangerous words. Oh, the grammar weekends. She would begin her lecture by saying that there were some words we shouldn't say ever. My brothers and I would ask her which words she meant, that we needed to know them so we wouldn't accidentally, inadvertently mention them. She'd say, I can't repeat them. We would ask her to write them down, or maybe just whisper them in our ears, which she finally consented to do. It turns out the bad words that kept my grandmother awake at night were gosh darn, along with heck and shoot and son of a gun. Did I mention she was Baptist? Did I mention that? Oh, times have changed so much. When our son Sam came home from basic training, I asked him, Sam, what did you learn? And his eyes bugged out of his head, and he said, my sergeant taught me that Teresa isn't the only word that comes after mother. Now, there was a man who could have used my grandmother. We've been talking about the do's and don'ts in times of change. Today, I want to talk about wrong words, bad words, dangerous words. There's a man named Timothy Snyder who was born in Dayton, Ohio to Quaker parents. He's now a professor of history at Yale University and has written, among other books, an instructive little book called On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. It's a fabulous book. And in that book, Snyder writes about a Nazi named Carl Schmitt, an attorney who created the legal underpinnings for the Holocaust. Remember that the atrocities of the Nazis were framed in moral and legal language. Carl Schmitt said the only way to destroy all rules was to focus on the idea of the exception. The idea of the exception. You convince people that the present moment is so fraught with risk and hazard that exceptions to the rule of law must be made. You then persuade people that the exception, the temporary deviation from the norms of decency, must become permanent. Timothy Snyder said this was the basis for every fascist movement around the globe. Fascists always start by warning us we're in danger, we're at risk, so we must suspend our usual practices and customs in order to counter some imaginary evil. So the historian Timothy Snyder says, in times of social change, listen carefully. He said, listen carefully for the growing claims of exceptions. We're already starting to hear them. Presidents must be above the law in order to do their job. So we become a nation of men and not laws. America must expand its territory, so we seize land that isn't ours. Native-born children aren't true citizens, so we become a nation with legal protection for some and not for others. We've been here before. In 1942, the newspaper columnist Walter Lippmann, hoping to pressure President Roosevelt into giving military authorities on the West Coast a free hand to round up and imprison 120,000 American citizens of Japanese descent, wrote, without offering any evidence, the Pacific Coast is in imminent danger of an attack from within. Colonel Carl Bendenston of the U.S. Army, placed in charge of the internment, even ordered the arrest of Japanese infants who had been adopted by white couples. Telling a priest in charge of an orphanage in Los Angeles, I am determined that if they have one drop of Japanese blood in them, they must go to a camp. Where have we heard that before? The same logic has been used to enslave black people, consign Native Americans to reservations, load Jewish people onto trains, and now Hispanics will be targeted. One drop of blood is all it takes. This is why in times of social change, we must listen closely for the language of exception, lest it create a permanent state of perceived emergency and thus becomes the doorway to tyranny. We were never really taught the bad words, were we? The real bad words, which are the words that single out the other, the words that justify evil, the words intended to stoke fear, not understanding. Those are the real bad words. Last week we thought about the visit of the Magi and their refusal to report the whereabouts of Jesus to Herod. From his infancy, Jesus owed his life to the civil disobedience of wise and honorable people, but he owed his death to people demanding an exception. When Jesus was arrested, he stood before Pilate, who thought him innocent, and said so to the gathered mob, telling them, I find no basis for a charge against him. In the custom of Passover, I will release one prisoner. Let it be this man. Instead, they demanded an exception and shouted back, no, not him. Give us Barabbas. Now, Barabbas had taken part in an uprising, so Barabbas was pardoned. Pilate, what a mess of a man he was, smart enough to know Jesus was innocent, but not brave enough to do the right thing. A lot of that going around these days. So Pilate made an exception. Barabbas was pardoned. Jesus was killed. Jesus owed his life to the civil disobedience of wise and honorable people. He owed his death to people demanding an exception. Pay attention, friends. Listen. Listen carefully for the language of exception. For the mob's demand that decency be set aside for the sake of safety or personal gain. Listen carefully for any demand that would have us forsake grace for greed. Now, to be sure, there are people who pose a threat to our nation, but it is never the dispirited and starving mother wading a river, her infant in arms, dreaming of a new life in a promised land. The real threat is posed by those who confuse evil for good, who with the bellows of hatred fan the embers of fear into a conflagration, who believe that one drop of blood can make someone our enemy and not our friend.
This is Linda Rocher. And a few years ago, my husband and I were on vacation in the Yellowstone area. And it just happened to be pouring rain. And we're like, okay, what can we do? We'd already been to some of the museums. And I researched on the internet and saw that there was a relatively new National Historic Site within reasonable driving distance. So we drove to the Heart Mountain detention site in Wyoming, which was a detention camp for Japanese Americans during World War II. Granted, it was pouring rain. It's relatively isolated. There were probably maybe 10 or 12 of us there. It was one of the most moving experiences of any place I've ever visited. The park rangers would talk, but as people moved through and looked at the exhibits, it was total silence. You know, we didn't know each other. It was just such a moving experience and so deeply affecting the people that saw it that I've never forgotten that. That has always stayed with me. And it's just a terrible part of our history, but it's important to know about it and try to protect ourselves and our nation so that we never do that again.
This is Mike Goss. This fear is so real already among such a large proportion of the populace, including some very educated people. Just to illustrate, I represented some clients at a guardianship hearing recently, and after the hearing, the judge knew that my wife and I go to Arizona in the winter, to Tucson, and he said, "Do you feel safe there?" I said, "Well, yeah, why shouldn't I?" And he said, "Well, it's so close to the border." And I said, "Well, I have never seen any indication of any threats or anything, no issues really." And he said, "Well, if you watch Fox News, you probably should be afraid." And I said, "Well, I don't watch Fox News, so I'm not afraid, but a man with that much education and authority in fear for a non-existent threat just really struck me."
Start again. In chat room today, I found a document that we talked partway through. We'll be using it for 2 or 3 weeks. It's a long document, 10 pages. It's called 10 Ways to be Prepared and Grounded Now That Trump Has Won. It's not, it sounds like a Democrat document, but it's not. It's anybody that's upset with this document. It's about preparation. It's about what can you do realistically. He's thought through this very deeply. He's coming from a totally nonviolent perspective. So hark back to the 60s there. He has thought through it so well in his points. He starts out with trust yourself and then find others you can trust. You've got to have something to ground you and start with. But the thing that, I want to get it right here, the thing that struck me here today is his very simple sentence, 3 words: fear breeds distance. Fear breeds distance. That's the nub of the problem. What we fear divides us. I saw a cartoon recently that I've seen before. It's an old cartoon. Doesn't matter the drawing, really. The caption was, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. You've all heard that. Those who do know history are doomed to watch those who don't know history repeat it.
Good morning. I'm in the legal business. I'm a judge. We're in the business of exceptions. So we think about legal problems and we try to anticipate whether the rule works or there's room for an exception or a necessity of an exception. Generally, you can tell a good exception if it bends towards mercy.
Are all minds and hearts clear? Well, now is the time for the community gathering, so if we could have some volunteers to come up and collect the food. And as we sing, as we collect the food, we'll be singing number 240 in the worship and song, The Long, Lone Wild Bird.
Thank you for your music. thank you also, and Rex, for your leadership, friend. A Fairfield story. We hadn't been doing chat room very long. We were still over in the 1892 meeting house. And one Sunday, a man carrying a pulpit Bible, a large Bible, came in, the Bible under his arm, and I thought to myself, we're about to hear a sermon. The chat room began. He raised his hand. We invited him to share what was on his mind, and he began telling us how America had gone to hell, a bad word according to my grandmother, ever since prayer had been outlawed in schools, and he was off to the races. We listened. It was fascinating listening to his theory about civil education. And when he finished, Larry Hesson looked at him with the kind of smile on his face and said, "I could not disagree more." So friends, you're going to hear things in the days and weeks and years ahead. Practice. Stand in front of mirrors and learn to say, "I could not disagree more. I could not disagree more." Turn and greet friends.